Mortal Kombat 1 is truly amazing to me. It managed to be one of the best films of 2023 and possibly the worst Nintendo Switch title ever created. I mean, that's really impressive. I'm always hyped about a new Mortal Kombat release, especially with these recent titles, not necessarily because of any gameplay specific reasons. It's mainly because I can see that Ed Boon and his team put a lot of love and energy into the cinematic storytelling of Mortal Kombat. And that's what makes the series, especially with these recent titles, very enjoyable for me. It took me a couple of days to go through the entire mk1 cinematic story, but I had a blast watching it from start to finish. So much so that about an hour in, I paused because I wanted to go back and watch videos to get a refresher on the timeline and the story leading up to mk1. And I'm glad I did, because the story reaches a point where the heroes are trying to figure out who the bad guy is, or I guess girl in this case, kinda, sorta. And before I get too ahead of myself, I know I didn't mention it, but there's going to be spoilers in this video because I just don't want to hold anything back. So if you aren't caught up with the story just yet, I highly suggest checking it out like as soon as you can. It's a little over 4 hours, but trust me, it's well worth the time. And if you remember to come back, shit, man, I'll be glad to have you. But yeah, anyways, I'm glad I went back, because MK11 hinted that there could have been two possibilities where either Liu Kang or Shang Tsung became the timekeeper. So right there they teased that there's going to be multiple universes, and I loved it. It kind of gave me a Bioshock Infinite / Rick and Morty kind of vibe. I'll explain that a little bit more later. But all in all, I was there for it, man. So I'm happy I got that refresher. And by the time the plot twist happened in MK1, I kind of had a good idea that it might have been an alternate timeline / parallel universe that was interfering with this whole thing. I did think that it was possibly another version of Kronika, so I'm glad I was still caught by surprise when it turned out to be Shang Tsung. Later in the story, you realize that it wasn't just two possibilities, that really there were an infinite number of them in which every character became the timekeeper. And I love this aspect about the story, because then you get to see all of your favorite characters in new and redesigned looks, some of which are a little more outlandish than the others, and that's kind of what I mean about the Rick and Morty kind of vibe. But overall, it culminated into a battle that's very reminiscent to Mortal Kombat Armageddon, but on a grander scale and between timekeepers. You can tell that MK1 really does pay homage and respect to its previous titles, because it references older Mortal Kombat games like Deadly Alliance and Deception, and I already mentioned Armageddon, and almost suggests that certain things are just predestined to happen and repeat itself. But they put a creative twist on these events. And I mean, the story is just packed full of these references and details. So much so that the only disappointment I had, and trust me, it's a very minor one, is the fact that they didn't bring back Onaga, the Dragon King. They did mention him and showed him a little during Reiko's ending and kind of hinted that it was possible he would come back, but he doesn't make a full-scale appearance, unfortunately. They showed his dragon army and had points in the story that suggested he was going to show up during the story, but sadly he didn't. And it doesn't make or break the story by any means, and really it's only unfortunate because he's one of my favorite characters. Deception was a title that I thoroughly enjoyed, oddly enough for the open world aspect. It was one of the first Mortal Kombat games that I was actually invested in, and I just had a blast playing through that story mode. But anyways, NetherRealm really took the opportunity to figure out how each character fits into this new story. I really like that Baraka is a good guy in this Mortal Kombat. He was always a cool looking character to me, and when I was younger, I kind of somewhat felt conflicted about thinking he was cool because he was inherently an evil character. But I appreciate the fact that in this version, he's a good guy, and he helps the heroes, and he's the leader of all the Tarkatan who've been outcasted, and really the dynamic between him and Reptile and Melina all just fits perfectly together and changes their fate for the better, and I think that that's really awesome. I even like what they did with Shang Tsung, where in the beginning of the story, he's essentially a snake oil salesman, definitely kind of like a smooth talking con man at first, and then he ends up taking that charisma and becomes the strong sorcerer that he was always meant to be. Liu Kang also looks awesome. I really liked his look at the end of Mortal Kombat 11, and they just made him look even more badass in this story. And overall, there's not a single character that I felt like was out of place. If anything, I felt like everybody was pretty well thought out. I like how we get to witness how some characters ended up being how we know them to be, such as Kenshi. We get to see how he was blinded, or I guess at the very least how he was blinded in this timeline. We also get to see Melina dealing with the early onset stages of Tarkat, and also how Kuo Liang gets his scar. And all of these are still connected to that idea that some things are always meant to happen, and I love that. I just feel like there was a lot of love and attention to detail that went into this cinematic story. Which is why I'm like, what the fuck happened to the Nintendo Switch version of this game? I mean, it's ridiculous, man. I mean, that we have a studio that can pump out great storytelling and an awesome cinematic experience, but really just give a big ass Johnny Cage middle finger to one of the big 3 video game consoles, and then have the nerve to charge us $70 like they think it's worth that shit. I mean, are they serious? It's not even worth half of that. So shame on NetherRealm for looking at that version and deciding that it's okay to roll out that game in that condition. The Switch is definitely a great console, and while it's not equal to a PS5 or a Series X in terms of hardware, there are absolutely good third-party titles on that platform that look and run amazingly. And the fact that Mortal Kombat 1 doesn't maintain that same level of quality, to me, is insane. There's no excuse for it, and everyone who bought the Switch version has a reason to be pissed off, especially when you compare it to the PS5 version. Because the differences in quality is apparent, and when you look at the price, they made sure that stayed consistent, which makes no sense at all. People have also been roasting the Nintendo Switch trailer as well for a couple of reasons. First, it's very misleading by making people think that the quality in the trailer is something they can expect when they pick up the game on the console. But second, you can see that there's a Steam achievement pop-up in one of the segments during the trailer. I mean, that shit is hilarious. It's apparent that whoever was in charge of the Nintendo Switch version of this game had absolutely no quality control and had no attention to detail on any front, even down to the launch trailer. And there are some people out there who are comparing mk1 on the Switch to like a PS2 version of Mortal Kombat, and even that, I believe, is too generous of a comparison. I mean, PlayStation 2 versions of Mortal Kombat look infinitely better. Hell, NES versions of Mortal Kombat look better. Mortal Kombat 1 on the Switch looks like trash. It's hardly a functional game, and it shouldn't have been released, especially at $70. The price is probably the biggest insult to fans on many fronts and shows tone-deaf negligence to that platform and to its players. So frankly, NetherRealm deserves all the criticism that's coming their way. And everybody who's purchased that version should be allowed to get a refund. And every studio, developer, and publisher needs to take this as a learning experience to either A, adjust the pricing, or B, optimize their game for a platform that clearly, since day one, has been understood to not have the same level of hardware in it as the other 2 big consoles. So, as much praise as I like giving them for their story writing, character design, and overall cinematic experience and presentation, I have that same level of criticism when it comes to their faults, especially when it comes to that Nintendo Switch version. I mean, truth be told, it's just a disastrous piece of shit.